The corridors of Nexus Prime buzzed with life from 1,000 different worlds. Merchants haggled over glowing cargo containers. Diplomats in elaborate robes glided past maintenance workers. Ships roared in the distance as they docked or departed, carrying precious metals, exotic foods, and travelers seeking fortune across the stars. But in the middle of all this prosperity, pressed against a cold metal wall in the main plaza, a young girl was dying of hunger. Her name was Kessa and she was Velcrin. Once, that word would have meant something. The Velcrin were warriors, administrators, leaders. Their purple scales shimmered with pride, and their golden eyes blazed with confidence. But Kessa's scales had faded to a dull, sickly gray. Her eyes were hollow, sunken into her thin face. She hadn't eaten a real meal in 3 weeks. She watched the crowd flow past her like water around a stone. Nobody looked at her. Or worse, they did look and then turned away with disgust written clearly on their alien faces. A family of tall insectoid Craxians approached, their compound eyes catching sight of her huddled form. The father made a clicking sound of disapproval and steered his children away. "Don't look at that creature," he buzzed to his offspring. "That is what happens when honor dies." One of the Craxian merchants nearby overheard and laughed, a harsh chittering sound. He walked closer to Kessa, his shadow falling over her. She tried to make herself smaller, invisible, but it was too late. "A Velcrin beggar," he said loudly, making sure others could hear. "I never thought I'd see such a pathetic sight. Tell me, girl, do your ancestors weep in shame? Or have they simply turned their backs on you entirely?" Kessa said nothing. She'd learned that responding only made things worse. The merchant spat a glob of yellowish fluid near her feet and walked away, still laughing. Several other aliens had stopped to watch the interaction, some shaking their heads, others smirking. A security drone hummed past, its sensors scanning her. For a moment, Kessa tensed, waiting for it to tell her to move along. But the drone simply recorded her presence and continued its patrol. She wasn't breaking any laws. She was just existing in the most miserable way possible, and that was perfectly legal. The thing about Nexus Prime was that it ran on a strict order. Every species had its place, its rank, its level of respect. At the top were the powerful, the wealthy merchants, the military commanders, the political elite. Below them were the workers, the traders, the common citizens. And at the very bottom, so far down they barely counted as part of society at all, were the dishonored. Kessa belonged to that last group now. It hadn't always been this way. Just 6 months ago, she'd lived in a comfortable home on Velcrin Prime. Her father had been a mining administrator, respected and trusted. Her mother had taught history at the youth academy. They weren't wealthy, but they had enough. More importantly, they had honor. Then her father discovered something he shouldn't have. He found evidence that High Commander Threx, one of the most powerful military leaders in Velcrin society, was stealing from the mining operations. Threx was selling rare minerals on the black market and pocketing the profits while reporting the mines as less productive than they actually were. Her father had believed in doing the right thing. He took his evidence to the council, certain they would investigate and bring Threx to justice. Instead, within 3 days, security forces raided their home in the middle of the night. Her father was arrested. Fabricated evidence appeared showing that he was the one stealing. The trial lasted less than a day. The execution happened at dawn. The council stripped their family of all honor. It was a Velcrin punishment worse than death. It meant they had never existed, that their bloodline was poison, that anyone who helped them would share in their shame. Kessa's mother died a month later, grief and despair simply stopping her heart. And now Kessa was alone, living in the spaces between society. She slept in maintenance tunnels. She drank water from public fountains when no one was looking. And she ate whatever she could find. Her stomach cramped painfully, the kind of pain that had become constant. She spotted a waste receptacle nearby, one of the fancy ones that incinerated most trash but sometimes left containers behind. Keeping her head down, she shuffled toward it. Inside, she found a half-eaten meal in a disposable container. The food was cold and soggy, probably hours old. She couldn't tell what species had eaten from it originally, but it didn't matter. She grabbed the container quickly and retreated to her spot against the wall. A Thullian family walked past just as she was lifting the container to her mouth. The parents were tall and elegant, with iridescent skin that shifted colors as they moved. Their 2 children, smaller versions of themselves, noticed Kessa immediately. "Mother, what is that creature doing?" one of the young ones asked, pointing. The mother's skin flushed a deep orange, clearly embarrassed. She grabbed her child's hand and pulled them along faster. "Don't point. And don't ask questions about such things. That is a being without honor." If you work hard and follow the path of righteousness, you'll never end up like that. The child looked back over their shoulder as they walked away, confusion and something like fear in their large eyes. Kessa watched them go, feeling a familiar numbness settle over her heart. She'd stopped feeling shame weeks ago. Now she just felt empty. She forced herself to eat the soggy food, even though her stomach rebelled. She needed the calories, needed the strength, even if it was just enough to survive one more day. She didn't know why she kept going. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was because giving up felt like admitting Threx had won. Around her, life on Nexus Prime continued its busy rhythm. Ships came and went. Deals were made. Fortunes changed hands. And nobody cared about the gray-scaled girl dying slowly against the wall, invisible in plain sight. Jack Mitchell wiped the sweat from his forehead as he studied the cargo manifest on his datapad. 12 containers of medical supplies, all destined for the outer colonies of the Tertian system. The pay was decent, but the timeline was tight. He needed to be off Nexus Prime within the hour if he wanted to make the delivery window. He'd been running cargo for 5 years now, ever since he'd saved enough to buy his own ship. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest. He transported goods across the galaxy, asked no questions about politics or wars, and made just enough to keep his ship running and food in his stomach. Most days that was enough. Jack walked through the plaza toward Bay 7, where his ship was docked. The station was crowded today, busier than usual. He navigated through the sea of alien species, most of them taller than him. Humans were still relatively new to the galactic community, and sometimes Jack felt like a kid walking through a crowd of adults. He was thinking about his route, calculating fuel costs in his head, when something made him stop. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way the crowd seemed to flow around a particular spot, like water avoiding a rock. Whatever it was, Jack's eyes landed on a figure pressed against the wall near the emergency access panel. At first, he almost didn't recognize her as a person. She was so thin, so still that she looked like part of the station's infrastructure. But then she moved, reaching into a waste container with trembling hands, and Jack's stomach dropped. She was just a kid. Couldn't be more than 15 or 16 by human standards, though Jack knew alien ages were tricky to judge. Her scales were a dull gray, and she was holding a discarded food container, trying to scrape out whatever remained inside. Jack stood there for a moment, frozen. Around him, dozens of aliens walked past without a second glance. A few even seemed to deliberately look away, as if acknowledging her existence would somehow contaminate them. The sight made something twist in Jack's chest. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. She'd raised him after his parents died, taught him everything important he knew. "Jackie," she used to say in her thick Boston accent, "you judge a person not by how they treat their equals, but by how they treat those who can't do anything for them. You remember that?" Jack looked at his datapad again. He really should keep moving. The delivery window was tight and stopping meant complications. But then he looked back at the girl, saw the way her hands shook, saw the desperate hunger in her eyes, and he knew his grandmother would have kicked his behind if he walked away. He turned around and headed back to his ship. The walk to Bay 7 took 3 minutes. He climbed the ramp, went straight to the galley, and grabbed the thermal container he'd packed for lunch. Inside was vegetable soup, still hot, and 2 thick slices of bread with butter. He'd been looking forward to it, but suddenly it didn't seem important. Jack walked back through the plaza, container in hand. As he got closer, he saw the girl had given up on the waste receptacle and was now sitting with her back against the wall, eyes closed, breathing shallow. For a terrible moment he thought he might be too late. "Hey," he said softly, stopping a few feet away. "Excuse me." The girl's eyes snapped open and Jack saw pure fear flash across her face. She tried to push herself further against the wall, as if she could somehow disappear into it. Her golden eyes were wide, watching him like a trapped animal watching a predator. Jack immediately held up his hands, showing he meant no harm. "Easy, I'm not going to hurt you. I just wanted to give you something." He held out the thermal container, but the girl didn't move. She stared at it like it might explode. "It's food," Jack said, keeping his voice gentle. "Soup and bread. I made extra this morning and I can't finish it all. Seems a shame to waste it." The lie came easily. He didn't want her to feel like charity. His grandmother had taught him that too. People had dignity even when they had nothing else, and you had to respect that. The girl's eyes moved from the container to Jack's face, then back to the container. She was searching for the trap, the trick, the catch. Jack could see it in her expression. Someone had hurt her before, probably more than once. "Look," Jack said, setting the container down on the ground and taking several steps back. "I'm going to leave it right here. You can take it or not, that's up to you. No strings attached. I promise. He waited for a moment, but the girl still didn't move. Jack nodded to himself and started to turn away, figuring she needed space. Wait. The word was barely a whisper, rough from disuse. Jack turned back. The girl was staring at him with those haunting golden eyes. Why? She asked. Why what? Why help me? Her voice was stronger now, though still quiet. You gain nothing. I have nothing to offer. I am. She hesitated, and Jack saw shame flash across her face. I am dishonored. Helping me could bring shame to you. Jack blinked, processing that. He'd heard about honor cultures, how some species placed enormous importance on social status. But the idea that feeding a hungry kid could be shameful? That didn't sit right with him at all. Where I come from, Jack said, crouching down so they were at eye level, we don't think about it that way. If someone needs help and you can help them, you do it. Simple as that. Nothing is simple, the girl said, but her eyes kept drifting to the container. This is, Jack insisted. You're hungry. I have food. Everything else is just noise. He could see her wavering, caught between desperate need and ingrained fear. Jack made the decision for her. He stood up, brushed off his pants and started walking away. Hey, he called back over his shoulder. If you don't eat that soup while it's hot, you're wasting perfectly good food. That actually would be a shame. He didn't look back as he walked toward his ship, but he listened. After about 30 seconds, he heard the soft sound of the container being picked up. Relief flooded through him. Jack made it back to Bay 7 and started his pre-flight checks, but his mind wasn't on the work. He kept thinking about those golden eyes, that trembling voice, the way an entire station full of sophisticated species had walked past a starving child without caring. His grandmother used to say that civilization wasn't about technology or laws or fancy buildings. It was about how people treated each other when no one was watching, when there was nothing to gain. By that measure, Jack thought, this shining station with its gleaming corridors and advanced ships wasn't civilized at all. He pulled up his route calculations and made a decision. The Tertian system could wait an extra day. He'd eat the penalty fee. Some things were more important than money. Jack saved a new course into his navigation system, one that would bring him back through Nexus Prime in 48 hours. He had a feeling that one meal wasn't going to be enough. And he was right. Jack kept his promise. 2 days later he was back at Nexus Prime and he brought food. This time it was rice with grilled chicken and vegetables, packed in 2 containers because he'd actually made extra. The girl was in the same spot, still pressed against that wall like it was the only solid thing in her universe. When she saw him approaching, something changed in her expression. The fear was still there, but mixed with it now was confusion and maybe, just maybe, a tiny spark of hope. I wasn't sure you'd come back, she said as Jack handed her the container. I said I would. Jack settled down against the wall a few feet away from her, giving her space but showing he wasn't in a hurry to leave. Mind if I eat with you? Gets boring eating alone all the time. The girl nodded slowly, and they ate in comfortable silence. Jack noticed she didn't gulp down the food this time. She was still hungry, that was obvious, but she ate more carefully, like she was starting to believe the food wouldn't disappear. I'm Jack, by the way, he said between bites. Jack Mitchell. The girl hesitated, then spoke quietly. Kessa. Nice to meet you, Kessa. Jack said it like they were at a normal dinner party, like she wasn't homeless and starving, like her dignity mattered. Because it did. Over the next week, Jack rearranged his routes. It cost him money in fuel and delayed deliveries, but he made sure to pass through Nexus Prime every other day. Each time he brought food. Sometimes it was human cuisine, sometimes he'd pick up something from the station's markets that looked safe for Velcrin biology. He'd done his research, learned what her species could digest. On his 4th visit, Kessa finally started talking. Really talking. You want to know why I'm here, she said. It wasn't a question. Jack shrugged. Only if you want to tell me. Everyone's got a story. You don't owe me yours. But she told him anyway. The words came slowly at first, then faster, like a dam breaking. She told him about her father, a man named Varix who'd worked as a mining administrator. How he discovered that High Commander Threx was stealing from the operations, selling rare minerals on the black market while reporting false numbers to the council. My father believed in the system, Kessa said, her voice bitter. He thought if he showed them the evidence, they'd investigate. He thought truth mattered. Instead, Threx had struck first. Security forces raided their home at night. Her father was arrested, and within hours, fabricated evidence appeared. Bank accounts in his name filled with illegal credits. Forged documents showing him as the thief. The trial was a formality. The execution was quick. In Velcrin culture, being declared a traitor doesn't just affect you, Kessa explained. It erases your entire bloodline. Everything my family ever was, every achievement, every honor, gone. And anyone who helps the dishonored shares in that shame. That's barbaric, Jack said flatly. Kessa looked at him in surprise. It's the law. It's how things work. It maintains order. It's still barbaric. Jack's voice was firm but not angry. Where I come from, we've got a saying. We judge a society by how it treats its most vulnerable people, not its most powerful. A system that punishes kids for their parents' supposed crimes? That's not order. That's cruelty dressed up in fancy words. Kessa stared at him for a long moment. Your species is very strange. We've been called worse. Jack smiled. But at least we try to do better. Doesn't always work out, but we try. He told her about Earth, about humanity's messy history. The wars and mistakes, sure, but also the progress. The way humans had learned, slowly and painfully, that strength wasn't about dominating others. It was about lifting people up. We've got this idea, Jack said, called second chances. The belief that one mistake, one bad circumstance, one piece of bad luck shouldn't define your entire life. That people deserve opportunities to start over. That sounds like chaos, Kessa said, but her tone was thoughtful rather than dismissive. Maybe. But it's also hope. By the second week, something unexpected happened. Other humans on the station started noticing Jack's routine. Humans had a tendency to stick together in the vast galaxy, and word spread fast in their small community. A woman named Rita who ran a parts shop in the commercial sector stopped by one day. She was in her 50s, tough as nails, with grease permanently under her fingernails from years of repair work. Heard you've been feeding this kid, she said to Jack, no nonsense in her tone. Then she turned to Kessa and handed her a wrapped sandwich. I make extra lunch anyway. Might as well not waste it. A few days later, a young guy named Devin showed up. He was a security consultant, barely 25, and he brought a thermal blanket. Nights get cold in these corridors, was all he said before walking away. Then there was Beth, a ship captain in her 40s who'd been hauling cargo since before Jack was born. She offered Kessa small jobs, simple stuff like organizing inventory in her cargo bay. Pays not much, Beth said gruffly, but it's honest work for honest pay. Kessa took the jobs. The first time Beth handed her actual credits for her work, Kessa just stared at the payment chip like she'd forgotten money existed. The alien community watched all of this with mixed reactions. Some continued to ignore Kessa entirely. Others whispered among themselves about the strange humans and their incomprehensible behavior. A few, though, started looking thoughtful. One afternoon, Jack arrived to find Kessa sitting up straighter. There was color in her scales now, a faint purple tint returning. She'd used some of her earnings to buy soap and had cleaned herself up in the station's public facilities. You look good, Jack said, genuinely pleased. I feel stronger. Kessa paused, then added quietly, thank you. For everything. For seeing me when everyone else looked away. Jack shook his head. You don't need to thank me for basic human decency. That should be the default, not the exception. In most of the galaxy it's not. Then maybe the galaxy needs to learn better. They sat together eating the meal Jack had brought, and for the first time since her family's fall, Kessa laughed at one of Jack's stories. It was a small sound, rusty from disuse, but it was real. Around them, the station continued its busy rhythm. But in that small corner, something was growing. Not just friendship between a human cargo hauler and a displaced alien girl, but something bigger. A challenge to the way things had always been done. Other aliens were starting to notice too. A young Craxian merchant watched the humans' behavior and began leaving extra food near his stall at the end of each day, where anyone could take it. A Thulian teacher started questioning why her society accepted such rigid hierarchies. Change was slow, almost imperceptible. But it was happening. And it all started because one human decided that hunger was wrong, no matter whose hunger it was. Jack didn't think of himself as special. He was just a guy hauling cargo across the stars trying to make an honest living. But sometimes, being ordinary and decent in a universe that had forgotten decency was the most revolutionary thing you could do. And Kessa, who'd thought her life was over, was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was still a future worth fighting for. The trial took 3 weeks and Nexus Prime talked about nothing else. News feeds across the galaxy picked up the story. A high-ranking Velcrin commander, exposed by security footage that had been sitting in the archives all along. A disgraced family that might not be disgraced after all. And at the center of it, a group of humans who'd refused to look away. During those 3 weeks, Kessa stayed in guest quarters provided by the station. Chief Inspector Varen had arranged it personally, stating that a potential witness in a major investigation deserved safe accommodation. It was the first time in months that Kessa had slept in an actual bed, had access to a real shower, had regular meals. Jack visited her every day. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat together in comfortable silence. Other humans stopped by too. Rita brought spare clothes that actually fit. Devin shared updates on the investigation. Beth offered to teach Kessa the basics of cargo management, saying she could use an apprentice. The trial itself was broadcast across multiple systems. The Velcrin Council took it seriously, knowing that their entire justice system was under scrutiny. They brought in independent investigators, reviewed every piece of evidence 3 times, and conducted interviews with dozens of witnesses. Threx's defense crumbled quickly. The footage was too clear, too consistent, too damning. His lawyers tried arguing that the evidence had been obtained improperly, but station records showed that Devin had simply requested archived footage through standard channels. Nothing illegal, nothing improper. Just someone actually bothering to look. More evidence emerged as investigators dug deeper. Financial records showing Threx's hidden accounts. Testimony from miners who'd been threatened into silence. Communication logs proving he'd ordered the fabrication of evidence against Varix. The case against him became airtight. On the 21st day, the council delivered their verdict. Guilty on all charges. Corruption, theft, murder, and conspiracy to pervert justice. Threx was stripped of his rank, his honors, and his freedom. He'd spend the rest of his life in a detention facility, his name becoming a cautionary tale about abuse of power. But more importantly, the council issued a formal reversal of Varix's conviction. Every charge was dropped. Every dishonor was erased. The family name was restored with full honors, and an official apology was recorded into the permanent record. Kessa sat in the hearing room when they read the decision, Jack beside her for support. When the words "full restoration of honor" were spoken, she closed her eyes and cried. Not from sadness this time, but from relief so profound it felt like breathing for the first time in months. After the verdict, the Velcrin Council summoned Kessa to a private meeting. Jack waited outside, pacing nervously until she emerged 2 hours later. "They offered me everything," Kessa said, still looking dazed. "A position in the administrative corps. Full access to my family's seized assets. Transportation back to Velcrin Prime. They said I could reclaim my father's legacy, take his place in society." "That's amazing," Jack said, genuinely happy for her. "When do you leave?" Kessa looked at him with those golden eyes, now bright and clear and healthy. "I'm not going." Jack blinked. "What?" "I told them thank you, but no. I told them I'm staying here on Nexus Prime." "Kessa, this is everything you lost. Everything you've been fighting for." "No," she said firmly. "What I've been fighting for is justice. And I got that. But going back to Velcrin Prime, taking some comfortable position, pretending the last 6 months didn't happen? That's not honoring my father's memory. He died because he tried to expose the truth. He died trying to make things better." She looked out at the station, at the busy corridors filled with beings from 100 different worlds. "I want to do something that matters. I want to use what happened to me to help others." And she did. With the reparations money from the council, Kessa purchased a large commercial space in the lower levels of Nexus Prime. It had been a warehouse once, abandoned and forgotten. Over the next 2 months, with help from Jack and the growing human community on the station, she transformed it. They called it Haven. It was a shelter for the outcast, the forgotten, the beings that society had thrown away. Anyone could come, regardless of species, status, or history. They'd get food, a safe place to sleep, and help finding work or passage to somewhere better. No judgment. No shame. Just basic dignity and a second chance. The other aliens on the station watched this development with mixed reactions. Some called it foolish, a waste of resources on those who didn't deserve help. But others, especially those who'd watched Kessa's transformation from starving beggar to advocate for justice, began to reconsider their assumptions. A Craxian merchant who'd once mocked Kessa showed up one day with a donation of food supplies. He didn't apologize directly, but his actions spoke clearly enough. A Thulian teacher brought educational materials, saying that everyone deserved access to knowledge. Even some Velcrin, ashamed of how their own people had treated one of their own, contributed funds and resources. Haven opened on a bright morning 3 months after Threx's arrest. Jack was there, of course, along with Rita, Devin, Beth, and at least 20 other humans who'd become part of this unexpected movement. They stood with Kessa as she welcomed the first residents. An elderly Torgon who'd lost his pension to fraud. A young Skelix who'd fled an abusive family. A Craxian worker injured on the job and abandoned by his employer. My father believed that the system would protect the innocent, Kessa said during the small opening ceremony. He was wrong. The system failed him. It failed my family. It failed me. But individuals, people who chose to care, they didn't fail. One human saw me when everyone else looked away. He shared his food when he didn't have to. He showed me that honor isn't about titles or social standing. It's about how we treat each other, especially when no one is watching. Jack felt his face flush with embarrassment as people turned to look at him. I just gave her a meal, he muttered to Rita, who stood beside him. Yeah, Rita said with a smile. You did. And look what grew from that. Jack continued his cargo runs, but Bay 7 became something of a landmark on Nexus Prime. Beings would stop by, some to drop off donations for Haven, others just to meet the human who'd started everything. Jack never quite knew how to handle the attention. He didn't think he'd done anything special. But that was exactly what made it special. On the 1-year anniversary of their first meeting, Jack and Kessa shared a meal together. Not scraps from a waste container this time, but real food at a proper table in Haven's communal dining area. Around them, dozens of beings ate and talked and laughed, all of them people who'd been given a second chance. You changed my life, Kessa said, raising her glass in a toast. Jack shook his head. No. I just reminded you that your life had value. You did the rest. You survived. You fought. You built all this. The humans have a strange way of seeing the world, Kessa mused, smiling. But I think the galaxy needs more of this strangeness. The story spread far beyond Nexus Prime. Other stations, other worlds, heard about Haven and started similar projects. The rigid hierarchies that had governed galactic society for thousands of years began to show cracks. Not everywhere. Not quickly. Change never came easy. But seeds had been planted. Some historians would later mark this as a turning point, the moment when humanity's influence began to shift galactic culture. They'd write papers analyzing the sociological impact, the economic implications, the political ramifications. But for Jack, it was simpler than that. He'd seen someone hungry and shared his food. He'd seen someone hurting and offered kindness. He'd seen injustice and stood against it, even when it was inconvenient and costly. That was all. And that was everything. Because sometimes changing the galaxy doesn't require weapons or wealth or political power. Sometimes it just requires one person deciding that another person's suffering matters. That dignity isn't earned through status but exists simply because someone is alive. Jack Mitchell went back to hauling cargo, living his ordinary life among the stars. But he'd proven something important. That ordinary people doing decent things could reshape the universe. And Kessa, once invisible and dying in a corridor, now ran a shelter that saved lives every single day. She'd taken her pain and transformed it into purpose. She'd taken her trauma and turned it into hope for others. The galaxy was vast and often cruel. But it was also full of possibility. Full of people who, given the chance and a little kindness, could become something remarkable. All it took was someone willing to see them first.